Look out across the Great Lakes, and you will see the greatest freshwater reserve on the planet. To the millions of people living in Ohio, Michigan, and New York, it is their lifeblood. But if you look closer, past the pristine shorelines, you will find the pipes, massive, rusted arteries of industrial steel. For decades, chemical corporations and manufacturing plants have used these pipes as a backdoor to the abyss, quietly dumping billions of gallons of chemical runoff, forever chemicals, and toxic wastewater directly into the lakes. You might think this is a crime. You might think the corporations doing this are hiding from the law. They aren't. Because the most terrifying truth about the Great Lakes is not that this dumping is happening in secret. It is that the government, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the politicians looked at the data and made it completely legal. The Great Lakes hold roughly 21% of the world's fresh surface water. That number comes directly from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The Great Lakes Commission estimates that more than 40 million Americans and Canadians draw their drinking water from these 5 lakes. 40 million people. The largest single source of surface drinking water on the continent. And yet, just below the postcards and the tourist beaches, an entirely different reality is unfolding. The lakes are being used, quietly and legally, as a dumping ground. Some of what is being dumped will outlive every person watching this video. Some of it will outlive every government currently writing the rules. And some of it, according to the Environmental Protection Agency's own published data, will remain trapped in the deepest, coldest trenches of Lake Superior for nearly 2 centuries. This is the story of what they are dumping into the Great Lakes, and how, exactly, they made it all legal. In 1972, the United States Congress passed the Clean Water Act. For most Americans, that was supposed to be the end of the story. The act was signed in response to a national scandal. 3 years earlier, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio, had caught fire. The river, choked with oil and industrial waste, burned in front of a horrified public. Lake Erie was widely reported to be dying. Congress acted. The Clean Water Act was supposed to fix it. And on paper, the law did something powerful. It declared that no person, no company, no factory could dump pollutants into the waters of the United States, unless they applied for and received a special federal permit. That permit is called an NPDES permit. It stands for the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. And it is, today, the loophole that runs the entire game. Here is how it works. A chemical plant on the shore of Lake Erie wants to dump waste into the lake. Under the Clean Water Act, that would be illegal. So the plant applies for a permit. The Environmental Protection Agency, or in most states, a state environmental agency acting under E.P.A. authority, sets limits on what the plant is allowed to dump. Those limits are called effluent limitations. They are written on a piece of paper. They are renewed every 5 years. And the moment that permit is issued, the dumping is no longer illegal. It is regulated. That is a very different thing. In 2021, the United States Government Accountability Office, the federal watchdog known as the GAO, published a report on how well the system was actually working. The findings were damning. The GAO reported that in 2018 alone, nearly 11,000 facilities across the United States had significantly exceeded the discharge limits written into their own permits. 11,000. That is not the number of facilities that polluted within the legal limit. That is the number that broke the limit they had personally negotiated with the government. And the GAO reported something else. The data the Environmental Protection Agency uses to track these violations is, in its own words, incomplete and contains errors. The agency, the GAO concluded, could not reliably measure whether things were getting better or worse. For a working-class family in Michigan, a $10,000 fine is a financial catastrophe. For a multi-billion-dollar chemical conglomerate, it is a single line on a quarterly spreadsheet. It is, quite literally, cheaper to pay the fine than to fix the pipe. And the Environmental Protection Agency, by law, lets them do exactly that. For decades, this was the headline scandal of the Great Lakes. Legal pollution, permitted dumping. A regulatory system that was supposed to clean up the lakes, but instead simply licensed the dirtying of them. But beginning in the early 2000s, scientists began identifying something new in the water, something the original architects of the Clean Water Act had never thought to write a permit for, something that, once dumped into a freshwater lake, would never break down, something that would, in the words of researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, outlive human civilization itself. The chemicals are known as PFAS. The letters stand for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. In plain English, they are a family of more than 10,000 synthetic chemicals. They were invented in the 1940s, and they were considered miracle compounds. They were used to make non-stick cookware, to waterproof rain jackets, to make stain-resistant carpets, to create the firefighting foam used on military bases and at major airports. But PFAS have one specific chemical feature that makes them unlike anything else humans have ever dumped into the environment. At the heart of the molecule sits a bond between a carbon atom and a fluorine atom. That bond is one of the strongest chemical bonds known to science. In nature, it does not break. Sunlight does not break it. Rainwater does not break it. Bacteria in the soil do not break it. Once a PFAS molecule is dumped into a lake, it stays there. That is why scientists and journalists, and now the Environmental Protection Agency itself, refer to them as forever chemicals. A study published in 2026 by researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and summarized by The Conversation, confirmed that PFAS have now been detected in all 5 Great Lakes. In 2024, researchers identified 85 previously unknown PFAS compounds in Lake Huron alone. That figure comes from the University of Michigan's Center for Sustainable Systems. And earlier this year, the Environmental Working Group, using the Environmental Protection Agency's own test data, estimated that 176 million Americans are now drinking tap water contaminated with PFAS. 176 million people. More than half the country. You would think, faced with numbers like that, the United States government would tighten the rules. In April 2024, that is exactly what the previous administration did. The Environmental Protection Agency, under the Biden administration, finalized the first ever national drinking water standards for 6 PFAS chemicals. The rule set legally enforceable limits. Water utilities had until 2029 to comply. And then, in May 2025, everything changed. The new Environmental Protection Agency Administrator, Lee Zeldin, announced that the agency would no longer defend the rule. According to a press release from the Environmental Protection Agency, dated May 14, 2025, the agency announced its intent to rescind the drinking water standards for 4 of the 6 regulated PFAS chemicals. The compliance deadline for the other 2 was extended by 2 years. By March 2026, the rollback was actively in court. The Environmental Protection Agency had asked a federal appeals court to vacate 4 of its own drinking water standards. The Natural Resources Defense Council, in a statement on its website, described it as the agency abandoning its scientific protections at the exact moment the contamination crisis was getting worse. The American Chemistry Council, the chemical industry's primary lobbying group, was a lead plaintiff in the original lawsuit to overturn the rule. The corporations responsible for dumping forever chemicals into the Great Lakes are not hiding. They are in federal court, asking the government to legally erase the standards designed to protect the water supply. And here's the part that makes the story even darker. Many of the companies most responsible for the worst PFAS contamination of the 1980s and 1990s no longer exist as the same legal entity. They have been restructured, reorganized, bought out. Some have filed for bankruptcy, shed their environmental liabilities, and re-emerged under different corporate names. The executives who approved the dumping kept their bonuses. The shareholders who profited kept their returns. And a chemical that will not break down in any human lifetime sits at the bottom of Lake Ontario, Lake Michigan, and Lake Superior. But forever chemicals are no longer the only threat. A new industry has arrived on the shores of the Great Lakes, and it is thirstier than anything the Rust Belt has ever seen. For most of the past century, the Great Lakes region was defined by heavy industry: steel, coal, petroleum refining, automotive manufacturing. When those industries declined, so did the cities that depended on them. Detroit, Cleveland, Gary, Indiana, Buffalo. The pollution remained. The jobs did not. But beginning in the 2020s, a new gold rush arrived in the Midwest. The technology industry. Specifically, the data centers that power generative artificial intelligence. A data center is, at its core, a building full of computer servers. Those servers generate enormous amounts of heat. To prevent the heat from melting the equipment, the servers must be cooled, and the cheapest, most efficient way to cool them is with water. A lot of water. According to the Alliance for the Great Lakes, a single hyperscale data center can consume more than 365 million gallons of fresh water in a year. That is roughly the annual water use of 12,000 average Americans. The Alliance for the Great Lakes report, authored by Senior Source Water Policy Manager Helena Volzer, warns that data centers in the Great Lakes region could withdraw more than 150 billion gallons of fresh water annually within 5 years. 150 billion gallons. Every year. From the same lakes that supply drinking water to 40 million people. The tech companies are not building these facilities in Arizona or Nevada, where water is scarce and expensive. They are building them on the shores of Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron, because the water here is plentiful, and because the water here is almost everywhere cheap. Helena Volzer, in interviews with multiple outlets including Great Lakes Now, has raised two specific concerns. The first is that much of the water consumed by data center cooling is evaporative. It does not return to the lake. It is lost into the atmosphere. The second concern is the water that does return. In Volzer's own words, that water will be warmed, and it may contain contaminants from the cooling process. The Alliance for the Great Lakes report points out that less than a third of American data centers are even tracking how much water they use. There is no federal requirement for them to disclose it. And here's the part that should disturb anyone living on the shore of one of these lakes. When data centers connect to municipal water supplies, instead of drilling their own wells, they become invisible. Their water consumption blends into the city's overall water report. Neighboring landowners cannot see it. Watershed advocates cannot see it. Regulators in many cases cannot see it either. That observation comes from a recent legal analysis published by the law firm McDonald Hopkins. In April of 2026, and the warmed water that does return to the lakes is feeding a separate ecological disaster. Each summer in the warm, shallow western basin of Lake Erie, a thick green bloom spreads across the surface of the water. The bloom is made up of cyanobacteria. The most common species is called Microcystis aeruginosa. It is, in plain language, a toxic blue-green algae. It produces a liver toxin called microcystin. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known as NOAA, tracks these blooms by satellite. In August of 2014, a particularly intense microcystis bloom drifted over the drinking water intake for the city of Toledo, Ohio. Toledo's water treatment plant could not filter the toxin fast enough. For 3 days, nearly 500,000 residents were told not to drink the tap water, not to cook with it, not to bathe infants in it. The crisis, according to local officials cited by the University of Michigan, ultimately cost the city around $65 million. Warmer water makes these blooms worse. Researchers at the University of Michigan reported that in 2025, NOAA detected cyanotoxins in Lake Erie on April 28th. It was the earliest detection in the agency's history. Meanwhile, state governments across the region continue to offer technology companies billions of dollars in tax incentives to build new data centers on the shores of these same lakes. Local officials hold press conferences. They celebrate the new jobs. They rarely, if ever, mention the water. And so we arrive at the final, quiet truth of the Great Lakes. The truth that the Environmental Protection Agency itself published decades ago. The truth that no industry, no governor, no lobbyist has ever been able to lobby away. It is the physics of the lakes themselves. Every lake on Earth has what hydrologists call a retention time. It is the amount of time, on average, it takes for water to cycle through the lake and flow out the other side. Lake Erie is shallow. Its average depth is only about 62 feet. Its retention time, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, is just 2.6 years. That means a contaminant dumped into Lake Erie today will, on average, flush out of the lake in less than 3 years. Lake Ontario's retention time is about 6 years. Lake Huron, 22 years. Lake Michigan, 99 years. And then there is Lake Superior. Lake Superior is enormous. Its surface area is greater than that of South Carolina. Its volume holds more water than all the other Great Lakes combined. Its maximum depth, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, reaches more than 1,300 feet. And its retention time is 191 years. 191 years. That is the official figure published by the Environmental Protection Agency on its Lake Superior fact page. A peer-reviewed study from 2023, published in the National Library of Medicine, described the same number with a different phrase. Pollutants in Lake Superior, the researchers wrote, are retained for nearly 2 centuries. Think about what that means. If a chemical plant on the Wisconsin shore of Lake Superior dumps a gallon of forever chemicals into the lake tomorrow, that gallon, on average, will still be in the lake when your great-great-grandchildren are old. The pipes never stop dumping, but the lakes also never let go. Down at the bottom of Lake Superior, more than 1,300 feet below the surface, the water is dark. It is cold. The temperature there stays just above freezing all year round. Sunlight does not reach it. Currents move through it slowly, methodically, almost imperceptibly. The sediment on the lake bed is fine and heavy and old. It has been settling there for thousands of years, and resting in that sediment, undisturbed, the forever chemicals continue their quiet, motionless half-life. Companies that dumped them have changed their names. The administrators who permitted the dumping have retired. The presidents who signed the laws are long out of office. The pipes above continue their work, and the lake below continues its work too. It remembers everything. Governors will leave office, corporations will reorganize, the tech billionaires will move on to whatever resource comes next, but the pipes never stop dumping, and the Great Lakes never forget.